Hello, good afternoon. We'll just wait for everyone to get in the room and then we'll get going. So if you give us a minute or two, we will get started in just a bit. Hello. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're just letting everyone in the room and then we'll get started, but maybe you can kick us off and let us know where you are connecting from in the chat. I am connecting from a very hot Malmesbury this afternoon. I know those of you in Joburg who are freezing, you're probably very jealous. It's a good 36 degrees today in the Swartland. So I've got my water handy and ready to get cracking. Let us know where you're connecting from in the chat. Hazyview, Benoni, Cape Town, Ballito, Kokstad. Whoa, wow. That's a good one. All right, let's get cracking. Welcome everyone to this SATIB webinar. We're talking how to manage the unrealistic expectations of the domestic market. Unrealistic in inverted commas, because as Don Scott will tell you, actually it is not unrealistic, it is very realistic. Joining me to delve into the dangers and opportunities of adapting your business model to that domestic market are Amy Knight-Dawson, who is the director of Scribe Consulting, and she's based in Cape Town, Don Scott, who's the owner of Tanda Tula, and Stacey Rowe, SATIB Branch Manager. So what are the risks involved with heavily discounting your rates? What are those obstacles that you're likely to encounter when you're dealing with the domestic market, and how do you overcome those? Those are just some of the topics that we're going to tackle, but this is your discussion as well as our discussion. So we would love to hear from you as well. You know that the chat is open. You've already been connecting in there. If you have a question, please feel free to pose that in the Q&A folder at the bottom of the screen. And here's something new for you. If you have a unique perspective that you are wanting to share with everyone on the call, we would be very happy to bring you into the panelist room temporarily to discuss it. Just raise your hand using the non-verbal hand raising cue at the bottom of your screen, and we will bring you into the main room temporarily so you can have your say and put you back again as attendee once you're done. So again, Q&A is for your questions. Chat is open. Let us know where you're connecting from. And if you would like to raise your own unique perspective live, use the non-verbal hand cue and I will bring you into the room temporarily. Right. With that, I'm now going to ask Don to kick us off because Don, you did not live in the domestic tourism space until very recently. I'd like you to tell us what happened. What did you do? How did you pivot, to use a very overused term, and how's it going? Are they really, really as terrible as we make them out to be?
Thanks, Natalia. Yeah, you correctly say. I mean, I think that most of us in the private safari industry come from a traditionally export market. And our kind of biggest concern when we saw, okay, we really do need to open up rates for domestic travelers, one of the concerns was that we were actually going to cause a bit of a ripple into our international market. I've actually said, and I'm sufficiently happy with what we're doing there, I've said that we actually have a good justification to have a different rate for the South African market, and that is that every South African, when they are spending money in Woolworths or filling up fuel in their car, they are having a direct impact, paying their taxes, they're having a direct impact on the cost base of our business, whereas international travelers are only actually contributing when they arrive in the country and up to the point at which they leave. So on that basis, we believe we had a good, strong justification to our international market. Interestingly, we did not have comeback from the international market at all regarding the introduction of rates that were more focused on the domestic market. What was a challenge was to work out what is the kind of rate that one should offer, because we did some pretty intense calculations to work out what did we need to do in order to cover costs. And in fact, what we found was that the resultant rate was actually not something that, having spoken to some of our wealthier friends and networks in Johannesburg and in Cape Town, not something that they would comfortably afford for a weekend. So we did a more of a top-down approach and said, okay, well, what are people willing to pay, and not get completely stressed out by the idea of coming on a holiday and your kids are sitting on their phone or their iPad, and you kind of in the mode of, you better damn well be enjoying this because we're paying so much for it. And we rather looked at, okay, well, how much are people willing to pay with that they would be comfortable with? And we settled on those figures, which are not really covering our costs in terms of the traditional costs that we have to cover in the safari environment. However, it's better than not earning anything, and it certainly is opening up a whole new category of loyal supporters for the South African safari industry. And for us, that is a really important reason for doing it. So those are the reasons. The challenges were, as I've just described. And then, of course, we had to see what would be the uptake of the South African market itself, and are they going to actually be interested in doing this? You know, as a South African myself, what do I do when I've got a weekend off? I shoot into Kruger and go and make my own braai, and I sit there in a bungalow and drive myself around, which is what I think a lot of South Africans have as their sort of traditional experience of the safari industry. And I'm obviously speaking about the safari industry because that's the industry that we're in. And are we going to get people interested in it? And frankly, we've been really pleasantly surprised. What we've seen is there's been a lot of uptake and a lot of interest. And then when people have come, especially those who've done the traditional South African go to Kruger and do my own thing type safari, they have been blown away and said, my goodness, this is a completely different thing. And we kind of get why people are talking about selling an experience rather than just selling beds and then people doing their own thing on their own game drive. So we've been pretty surprised in a good way as to the uptake and the responses that we've got from those South African rates and from the domestic market.
It's a pretty interesting point that you raise about creating a market that was perhaps not there before, you know, like growing the pie, because a lot of us at the moment are in a kind of space of panic, and we think, well, the pie is only so big. We're targeting the domestic traveler. The domestic travel pot is only so big, and we're all fighting for that little piece, a piece of that very, very little pie. But what I'm hearing from you is actually that pie has the potential to grow, essentially, and that it isn't just a pie that we snack on while we wait for our internationals to come back, that there is actually a case for saying that when the internationals come back, there will still be a strong domestic tourism market. Is that something you would agree with?
Very, very definitely. And in fact, we decided very early on that this is not something that we're switching on and then switching off. This is something that we're going to keep going. You know, there's a lot of countries who do have local rates and international rates. The South African market has not traditionally done that, but for us, we've actually seen that this is something that we want to continue with. Part of the reason for that as well is that I think that what we've found is within the last year is those people that have come to travel, when it is something that connects with you, they become very, very loyal supporters, and South Africans talk to their friends. So, you know, we've had probably in the last 3 months, we've had about, I don't know, 6, 7 groups of people who've arrived. You know, it very much is weekend travel now. So it's people coming on the weekends, whereas, you know, in the past, I didn't know when I was on a weekend or a weekday. It was all dependent on when my kids went to school. But nowadays we can actually see the bookings are moving towards weekends. And we've had at least 5 or 6 groups that have said, you know, so-and-so from Cape Town came and they said we must come here. So that's where we are. It's also a much easier logistical process for South Africans to make a booking either directly or through an agent, where you're not trying to piece together an entire route that's got to now fit in with the whole 2-week itinerary and travel plan. It's just kind of, well, let's get on a plane, let's jump in the car, let's go down, spend a couple of 3-4 days, and then let's go home. So you're booking one place. It makes the process for the tour operators and travel agents so much easier if they're engaging, and it makes it a really easy direct booking journey for South African guests. So we definitely see this as something that's long term, and we see it as being something that will gain a lot of support amongst South Africans. There's a lot of South Africans who can afford this and who might decide, well, let's travel a little bit more within our own country in the future as well, rather than going skiing in Austria or France.
I'm going to move on to Amy in a second, but I suppose, Don, part of that is also you talk about the flexibility of South African travelers, but this the lastminute.com type booking and, deciding this week that you're going to actually be traveling for Easter, essentially. And I'm sure there's a lot of last minute stuff going on. I'm curious, Amy, if I can ask you to come in here about how you, from a business perspective, would balance, as Don is going to be balancing, this lastminute.com from a planning perspective, because how do you plan a business around lastminute.com? But at the same time, then having a scenario in hopefully a few months' time where you're balancing domestic and international. How would you do that from a business perspective?
Thanks, Natalia. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone. From my perspective, the South African traveler does not like to be limited. And I think it's very important to remember that you have one friend in all of this, and it's a little word called yielding. So you're welcome to decide on your rate, but you have the flexibility in the back end to yield. So whatever it is that you want to put out there, remember that you can switch on and off in the back end, but just don't fall prey to the idea that you want to say it's only valid between now and then, or midweek only, or X, Y, and Z, because the South African traveler likes to make their own decisions. They like to be in the driving seat. So rather have, like we do for internationals, have your deals valid for as long as possible, so that you can market to that client and get your brand into their hearts and minds. Like to your point, Don, where you said South Africans can be very loyal. If the experience speaks to a South African, they are known to either travel again to a similar place or the same place, or they want to tell their friends about it. We are very social as a nation, and there's nothing better than telling stories. We love telling stories to our friends, to our family, and we want to be able to tell the good stories. And I believe that if you make packages attractive to the South African traveler, you have a friend in that market, because we've been sold packages all our lives, outbound packages mostly, and now we have this unique opportunity to actually take that mindset of great value added packages and bring that market in and say, and again, where I say yielding, you can put that rate a little bit higher, but you add value that this market isn't expecting. For example, if you have a winter rate, you can make it a little bit more, but in fact, you can actually add something in, like a head and shoulder massage, or a private little sundowner stop. These types of things are really easy to do on the ground operationally, and it will just add that loyalty factor. And South Africans love value. All clients love value, and that's what I would do.
Yeah, we like a little extra cream on the top, something extra negotiating. Stace, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Amy, and that was around this balancing act between international and domestic. If I'm a business and traditionally I was looking after the international tourist, I automatically would think from a kind of liability perspective that the domestic travelers are more robust. So I'm not going to get hit with these, whiz bang EU fines that are really, really scary. Surely I don't need to, and I'm now trying to save costs because the South Africans don't pay what the internationals do. Can I start skimping a little bit here and there? How would I need to change? How would my liability change, and what would I need to do from an insurance perspective?
Okay, so I'll touch on liability separately, but we'll just speak from a risk perspective. Unfortunately, very little changes with your risk profile. In fact, now more than ever, you need your insurance. This global pandemic has just perpetuated the economic challenges South Africa was faced with pre-COVID. And all that's happened now is there's just been an increase in property crime and civil unrest. I mean, I would say in the last 12 months, we've seen a spike in claims for bulking, fraudulent misuse of credit cards, theft of guest effects, theft. And it just highlights the importance of not only keeping your insurance in place, but also having a specialist broker that understands what you're going through. From a liability perspective, perhaps you catered to the high net worth or the international, and you had a 50 million limit or a 60 million rand limit, and maybe we can look to reduce costs, but perhaps dropping that to 10 million or 20 million. There are ways and means to get around it.
What is bulking? Sorry, I know I should know this because I'm a word person.
So that's when a guest would...
Is like that milking, but with what?
No, leave without paying. It happens. Yes, yeah.
Ron, have you had any bulkers?
No. So our model is one where we require payment up front before anybody arrives. No, definitely not. Not in our product. We did have, like I said to you before, we've had a couple of influencers who've attempted to to interest us in providing for free accommodation, etc., hoping that we'll jump on the social media bandwagon with them. But no, we have not had anybody try and, but I guess that is different for different products. I mean, you have a lot of hotels where you can book, you can arrive, and you get charged on checkout. We don't work that way.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that, as you said, Stacey, are you getting that? Are customers saying to you that they're getting booked?
Well, we see the claims in the last 12 months. It's gone through the roof, and sadly, it is largely the domestic market. So
that is so cheeky.
Yeah.
That is so cheeky, absolutely. And as one of the points in the chat was actually to the point around different experiences. Kay said, I think the experience is also by region. Some people will look for outdoor spacious place to be socially distanced. If you have a business in town, your guests are mostly there to see the city living, and if this is shut down, you're not able to do that, thus not able to be as socially distant. So different issues. Yes, and I think that that's a really good point. So domestic tourists are not, one domestic tourist is not the same as all domestic tourists. And Don has very cleverly identified within the domestic tourism space who his customer is, and he is going after that specific market segment, as opposed to saying, this is the domestic tourist plant and I'm going after all of them. Is that what you did, Don? Did you sit down with a pen and paper and say, these are the domestic tourists, I'm going after that slice of the pie? You're on mute.
No, I just lost you there. My screen jumped across and brought something else on, so I couldn't unmute myself. Sorry about that. Yeah, very definitely. I mean, the process here was to actually establish whether or not there was even sufficient demand for us as a safari product, and realizing that we represent a very small slice of the tourism demographic, both internationally and locally. So there's no difference in terms of how we focus our marketing for the international versus the domestic. We're still quite a narrow slice. Very definitely it's not going to be something that is going to be affordable for everyone. We realize that, but that's the same as any product that anybody's marketing into any sector. There's Volkswagens and Toyotas and Land Rovers and Porsches. So there's segmentation in every market, and yes, I think if you if we go back to what the title is of this webinar is managing expectations. I think if you try and sell something to somebody who's not your market, then you're already on a hiding to nowhere. So identifying who your market is and targeting your communication to those sectors, I think, is really, really the first step. And the second step is, of course, educating your market before they arrive as to what they can expect, because that's what managing expectations is. So, what we've found, and I'm going back to that, what I said about South Africans, because I'm one of them, being used to experiencing safari where you go and you do your own thing, is ensuring that people actually understand that the experience that they get on a private safari is a completely different thing to driving yourself around the Kruger. And if people do understand that, then normally actually what happens is that it exceeds their expectations. And that's in fact that's your ideal, that's what you want. So I think that, sorry, I'm getting...
Someone wants to talk to you on WhatsApp.
Sorry, so sorry about that.
It's fine.
I'll switch that off. So yes, so identifying the correct market, realizing that you can't be everything to everyone, that's the one thing. And then, of course, communicating what you're offering very specifically so that it is not a case of people arriving thinking they're getting one thing and they're getting another. So yeah, that's
really, really helpful advice. And a question that we received from Anonymous, don't know who you are, Anonymous, around rates with regards to the domestic market. I think again, and Don, you'll bear me out if this is true or not, and Amy actually, it's about understanding where you fit in that pie, essentially who the target market is, and pricing yourself based on that specific market segment's requirements, as opposed to just in general pricing yourself with the domestic traveler. It's not the domestic traveler, it's the domestic traveler that has the finances to go to a game lodge. It's the domestic traveler who has the finance to stay at a B&B in St. Francis. They're different customers, essentially. And I guess look at what your competitors are offering. Amy, do you have any thoughts around that?
Thanks, Natalia. From this side, I would say, look at your partnerships, because just like any market, your business is dependent on your partnerships. So if you need to, as a tour operator, now pivot, overused word, from mostly export now to your domestic market, you need to also look at where you fit in this market and what kind of customers you are looking for as a tour operator, and what kind of products are you looking to promote. Are you looking for those which you have a particular resonance with? I think that in this market, it is certainly driven by currency of trust. And if you are now going to go and chase commissions and try and be all things to everyone, you're not going to make the most of this new market. So I would say certainly look at the product that you believe in, and forge partnerships with those people that you'll be surprised how flexible certain suppliers can be. Obviously, on local rates, they have less of a wiggle room in terms of commissions. But if you can work out a deal that, maybe you have, a specific access to market, or there's a partnership that you can strike up with, another organization, and you can start to feed them more regular business, you do really need to think out of the box in this scenario and forge new partnerships that you potentially would never have otherwise done, and try and eke out your niche there.
That's a great segue to one of the questions we received. I think it is more of a comment from Feiruz, who was saying, we normally do outbound international, but we changed to domestic tours. Local is lekker, of course. The other thing I heard on Tuesday was domestic or die. Not so sure. We got some entrepreneurs on board as far as Neisner to make their experiences affordable for locals. So looking at who you can partner with that you perhaps would not have partnered with before. And I know a lot of businesses that were doing one thing are now doing something very different because they don't have the market. Stacey, if I can go on to you about side hustles. So I've run into people who own restaurants and now are doing catering, for example, a very different type of business. I've got other guys who were running small wheels operators that are doing just kind of airport transfers, for example. So their businesses have had to change. They've had to focus on a market that does exist for them in the domestic space. How do you do that? How do you kind of shift from a liability perspective? How do you make sure you're covered if you have to change your main business into a side hustle business?
Look, that's a great question. Look, more and more clients are diversifying, and I think it's amazing. Very little has to change. I think it just starts the conversation with your broker. Let them know what new activities or services you're going to be providing, and they can just adjust your risk profile accordingly. Your premiums are calculated on your risk profile, so if your risk profile changes, you'd need to let your insurer know.
Okay, great. All right, Anonymous has said, I can see how it can be successful for products to work with local customers, but it is a different story for tour operators, as many accommodation providers do not offer commissionable domestic rates. Any tips for operators in this regard? Or is it a lost cause? Oh, I hope it's not a lost cause. Don, Amy, any suggestions?
I can talk from a product perspective, just in terms of, because I know that there was quite a bit of talk about commission structures and so on. I'm not sure about people not offering any form of commission on the domestic market, but our philosophy is just, again, it's a logical philosophy which says that the amount of effort to put together a trip for a South African who's just going to one place and then coming home again is a whole lot easier, and therefore it justifies a lower commission structure. And also, you know, products have to look at their ultimate yield, where we're already in a situation where the rates that we are having to offer are, as I said before, a top-down calculation. So it's what people can afford rather than what actually covers the cost of the business. You know, you're already in a lossy position on normal kind of occupancy. So the ability to give away larger commissions is just not there. So I'm not sure what the answer is for the tour operators, but I would think to try and ensure that the systems that you have in place are sufficiently slick to allow for managing local bookings and freeing up the time of your staff, and not having to spend ages of time on a specific booking, would then be a way in which you can justify the lower commission structures. That's a thought. I'm not a tour operator myself, so I'm not sure what the answer is there. But you know, I still believe that there's commission money to be made on the domestic market. It is just a lower margin, and it's based off a lower rate anyway, so it is going to be smaller. And I do get it that some tour operators, in fact, we've had a number of tour operators who said, look, guys, we're not in this market. We're going to continue, you know, we've got to continue selling for the future, and we're going to focus on the markets that we traditionally are very strong in. But I see that there are, you know, we've now dealt with a lot of South African operators and agents who are very definitely focusing on the South African market. And they've been pretty effective, you know. But like I say, the amount of work required to, you know, just book Tanda Tula versus, you know, having to do an entire itinerary and flights and charters and transfers and all of that kind of thing is a whole different amount of work. And therefore, I think that those commissions are required to be higher when there's so much effort going in. But I think maybe Amy can comment more from a tour operator's perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Really, to me, it really boils down to partnerships and where you are in the market, and whether it is worth your while to actually go after the domestic market. There are a few players who have been doing it very successfully for many years, and who have a steady stream of business. You know, I would say response times are of utmost importance, because you know, there's always that temptation for people to, everything's so instant these days, you know, and if you don't get back to your potential client quick enough, there are a few competitors, specifically online tour operators, who have been very successful in this arena and are now really capitalizing on the market shift. So you have a few of them, and if you are a smaller tour operator who has not played in this market before, why not contact the more prolific ones and see if you can strike up a partnership? Because they would most likely have already negotiated ahead of this time really good rates, because they've been supporting certain places for longer. So they have this will just simply become a new revenue stream for them, your business. So as a tour operator, you really need to look at where you fit in the market, what type of client you're looking to gain from this time. Is it something that you're willing to invest the time and money in, because time is money, and the effort, because it's going to require partnerships. And everything in this time is based on partnerships. Recovery is specifically based on partnerships, and you just need to choose where you want to be.
Yeah, I was thinking of Natalie actually when you were talking, Don and Amy. So Natalie's just pasted in the chat. We are a DMC and have started selling domestic packages with a very small markup. We have never worked so hard. I hear you. Amen. With our national carrier constantly changing or cancelling flights and our government closing beaches, most people have rebooked, so it's double the work for a meager commission. And I think that is such a good point, Natalie, because if I look from an outbound perspective we always used to say the domestic traveler would never use a South African travel agent to travel domestically when they could just do everything themselves. But the reality is the questions that these customers have at the moment, this uncertainty gap is so massive. Maybe not if it's a self-drive traveling to the Kruger National Park from Johannesburg, but if they're flying, for example. Now, all of these questions that need to get answered by an expert because they need the security of a professional that they would not have needed before, even though they're still traveling domestically, but at the same time are not used to paying for the professional advice that a Natalie can offer. So I hear you, it is incredibly difficult to balance that. And I guess, again, the question is, who are your partners? Who can you be working with to try and increase the value so that you can charge more? And if that is the only market that you have available to you at the time. I'm going to just segue to, and Don, I'm going to ask you about this because you sort of mentioned a little bit earlier around group rentals. So how you can appeal to this South African market. Are you seeing a lot of exclusive use type stuff happening? Are the domestic guys, you said they were traveling in groups and you've had repeat groups. Is that one of the idiosyncrasies that you're seeing from a South African market perspective? And are there any others that we should know about?
Look, I don't think that there's any sort of exclusive behavior as far as groups go. We do have still very much our FIT market as well. What we have noticed, look, we switched on an exclusive use camp during lockdown last year, specifically because we anticipated that there would be this desire. But interestingly, that exclusive use camp has had a lot of uptake. So that does show the desire for people to travel in groups where one is in your kind of safety bubble with your friends and you can interact with them. You don't have to worry about all of the COVID-19 protocols at a specific destination and the social distancing associated with it and so on. You can be within your own group. So yes, that is definitely, we've seen that, and guests have mentioned that. But at the same time, there's also been just as many FIT travelers still coming to our main safari camp. Whether there's a shift towards a more exclusive group travel in the domestic market, I wouldn't be able to say from our own experience, but I certainly see that by catering for both, we are getting both. We have a seasonal field camp that we opened up now, just starting in March. And that has had a huge uptake from South African travelers. It's very, it's not the same product as Safari Camp. It's very much focused around walking. Again, you've got groups, it's smaller groups, it's groups of 8 who have, literally booked this thing out. As soon as we kind of opened up that we're ready for bookings, it just started receiving bookings. So it does show that there's an interest. But I don't think that it's exclusive. I think that there's still a lot of people out there who are kind of happy to travel couple or on their own or in a smaller group, maybe of 4 or 6 people.
And is it mostly Gautengers?
We've had I'd say probably 60% Gautengers and then the remainder from the Cape. But a smattering as well from our local provinces, which has been very cool. So we've seen people coming up from Nelspruit. There's the ability to jump in your car and drive somewhere and go and spend a couple of nights where the travel costs are actually not part of the whole cost of the exercise, I think has been very attractive for people. So we even considered introducing a lekker Lohvelder rate which would be a one-nighter for people who, but it would have to be exclusive to like one night only. So if you can shoot out from Hoedspruit or zip up from Nelspruit and come for a night, then you fill a gap, right? So we toyed with the idea. For our operation, it became a little bit difficult until we can get continuous momentum, because you'll see, and if you speak to a lot of the safari products, because we're small and we only have a certain number of rooms available, and because you're getting these booking windows now towards weekends, you're starting to get gaps. Yeah. And what you don't want is, you don't want a situation where you have to switch on your whole machine because you've got one guy from Hoedspruit who wants to come for a night. So we actually need more momentum before we can do that. But yeah, so I do think that we'll see some more sort of even hyper-local travel starting to happen fairly soon.
What a balancing act though, hey? It must be so difficult managing a business like that at the moment.
It's more of a tightrope than a balancing act.
A tightrope. Don, I'm going to ask a very silly question, please. I apologize, but do you sell alcohol inclusively?
Normally, yes, but for our domestic rates, we could not justify having that as an inclusive portion. So and there again, it's managing expectations. You know, yeah. We explain that to people that are booking on the South African rates. Guys, listen, you know, we cannot afford to give you the Johnny Walker Blue on top of what you're going to have to pay for it. And nobody's had an issue.
Do I still get a G&T though if I'm out on a game drive? This is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. No. That's, you know, drink stops, that kind of thing, coffees, teas, all of that sort of thing is normal. But normally, you know, our rates are all inclusive. So when we say all inclusive, it's everything from French champagne to, you know, to single malt whiskies to whatever you want. But at these rates, of course, you've got to segregate those things. Otherwise, it just becomes impossible.
Yeah. So on that note, Stacey, and I know this having to write press releases because somebody's fallen off a balcony because they got drunk, or they wandered off into the bush when they shouldn't have because they had one too many whiskeys. Surely that must have, again, it's probably the most odd and silly question, but surely that must have implications. Like, now I don't have these drunk South Africans running around. You know what? We have a reputation for loving our alcohol.
Well, there's certainly less claims of people falling off balconies.
And
so your life share will stay there and your premiums will remain low, but not so many implications.
Fewer SATIB 24 call-outs, certainly.
Yes. Fewer calls in the middle of the night, yeah.
Absolutely. So we have a point in the chat to something that Amy said from Erica. She said, Amy made a good point earlier about making sure that suppliers have an offer for long enough to be able to market it. It's a very good point. And the industry to remember to use it. As a sales consultant with so much changing so often, it's impossible to remember all the options to offer the client who needs an answer now for offers that were valid for 2 weeks or maybe valid for 3 months, only to be validated, the only validated lead to come in after 3 months, and then it's not valid anymore and the travel is still in the same position as we were 6 months ago. Oh my goodness, back and forth and back and forth. Amy and Don, how do you make sure that your distribution channel is fully aware of what's going on when you have to juggle stuff on the fly, like it seems like you've got to? How do you keep them in the loop? What are your secrets?
Well, I'll go first, if that's okay, Don. Really, you need to earmark those people who are your contacts, and you need to communicate very closely about what your offer is, how long it's valid for, and remember that, you know, if you can automate as much as possible, it'll help you and your tour operator clients, your travel agent clients, because if there's a place like a little portal on your website, possibly that you have a login, you know, for your agents to go to, and you just keep it simple. You have one place that they can go to. It's, you know, some people have that and it's login driven, so the rates are not visible by your international clients. There is still that concern. Some people are very worried that they don't want their local rates to be viewed by international, because when all of this is over, they're worried about a backlash. So that being the case, rather have a dedicated portal for your agents, and very clear, streamlined communications. Create a segment in your mailing list that communicates only to specific people about specific rates. But yes, certainly less is more in this instance. There is so much happening that you really want to make it easy to be remembered, number one. You want to be top of mind, and you want to be remembered as the person who is flexible, welcoming, and really the one that facilitates an easy transaction.
Yeah, I must say I agree with Amy there. Keeping things simpler. I think if we look at last year, there was a massive flurry of people introducing all sorts of specials and packages. And I mean, I get that. It's products wanting to be noticed for doing something maybe a little bit different. The problem with that is exactly as Amy said, it just ends up being too much in the mix, and people literally can't disseminate what they actually want out of it. From our perspective, we've changed philosophy to say, okay, let's just keep things as simple as possible. Let's not introduce too many specials. And I agree definitely with the person who commented in the chat to say that if you're going to introduce a special, you need to make it a special that runs for long enough that's actually going to be, viable for them to sell. You can't switch things on and off, and it just creates confusion in the market. And it certainly doesn't help the trade in any way. So, our side, we've tried to keep the number of specials as simple as possible. So we've got a domestic rate, we've got an international rate, and we've got a honeymoon special, and that's pretty much all it is. And then one thing which we've been very brave on, which has had some wonderful feedback from the trade and also some kickback from the trade, has been we introduced a dynamic discounting model. So our rates are live, a little bit like an airline. So it depends on how busy we are. It depends on what your booking lead time is. That's the rate that you get. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to have live availability and rates to your trade partners. So you cannot expect them to, well, some still do, to be honest. I mean, not everybody's got the tech savvy to drill in with an API into your back end. Not everybody's linked to channel managers. So some people do just phone, and then they get the rate, but you then have to accept that if you're quoting somebody on that and you've got a dynamic rate, you have to lock in that rate until such time as they've made a decision. And once they've made their decision, you then have to stick to that rate. So that also then speaks to when you have a special, and Amy alluded to flexibility. If your special runs to the end of June and these guys are running to book on the special and it runs into July, really, are you going to tell them no? Or are you going to say, look, let's push it across and make it work for you? Or even if someone is outside the booking window of that special and they're saying, listen, I can get this client for you, but we're going to need to offer them that special, then why not? It's better than an empty bed. So I think it's all a little bit of a juggling act. And I think that most products are willing to be flexible, particularly now where we don't have the kind of momentum that we used to have. And then the trick is to see who's going to remain flexible when we get busy again.
Yeah, talking about juggling acts and tightropes, dual pricing. Do you see both international and domestic rates being implemented permanently going forward?
Us, yes. Yeah, for us, yes. We're definitely, and I said this to you earlier, we justify this by the fact that South Africans are affecting our cost base by every penny that they spend in our economy. So there's an absolute justification for why there should be a different price tag for South Africans versus internationals.
Okay, great. I'm going to wrap our webinar up. I'm going to ask each of our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us, to give us some parting shots about how to manage the, let's not say unrealistic, but the expectations of the domestic market. If you were going to convey one thing that you wanted people to walk away with today, what would that one thing be that you would want them to know? And I'm going to start with, let's see, Stacey.
I think from my side, look, we understand the financial burdens that all of the guests listening today are going through. Being in tourism ourselves, we find ourselves in the same boat. And I would just like to encourage you all to reach out to your brokers. find out how to restructure your policies. If there's a way we can save you money, let's do it. If you are happy to carry a portion of the risk, increase your excess, insurers will will always give you a discount on your premiums. So from our side, from the insurance side, we're happy to help. Just pick up the phone.
Thanks, Stace. Amy?
I would say identify your purpose. If you are going to go for this market, understand your why, because you may want to pursue this for a limited time, or for, like Don, you've committed to the long-term benefits of having this as your base market. Understand what it is that you would like to get out of the transaction, for want of a better way of putting it, but also understanding the value that you can add to this client's journey and also to the market. Because if you do take the leap of time and investment to pivot into this market, it probably won't be a quick fix. It'll be a slow burn, and it'll be something that either you're committed to in terms of the long-term rewards. It's a new market. You know, it's you can see success stories of it. It just depends on whether or not you are keen to get into that pool and swim in it, or if you want to dip your toe, if you want to, you know, forge partnerships and, you know, sort of derive benefit from sort of the sidelines, or if you want to dive right in and do it like Don and his team are going to do it. They've committed, you know, both feet in, and they, you know, this is the time to make those decisions. This is going to affect your business going forward in a very real way. The question is, can you commit to it or not, and understand your purpose for doing so.
Don has dived right in, but he's also sofa safariing, aren't you, Don?
Yeah, no, that's been a wonderful little addition, and that was taken up by both, you know, in both hands by a lot of our fan base, which has been really, really cool. It got attraction like we really didn't expect. It was literally, we came up with it in lockdown, and it wasn't, you know, my or Nina's idea. It was actually from our team themselves. You know, and it was a way of keeping busy and doing something interesting whilst we were all locked up in camp for 3 months. So yeah, it got wonderful traction, and it's been a great journey. I must say, as things are getting busier now, we're starting to move towards a shorter Bush Bites version, which will be like a 3-minute thing rather than a half hour, because these guys also have to go and do their jobs now. But that has been very cool. In answer to the one thing that I would take away in terms of managing expectations would be, it's very simple. It's communicate, communicate, communicate. There's no way you are ever going to expect somebody to arrive at your, whether it be a B&B in Cape Town or whether it be a high-end safari lodge in the Greater Kruger, and understand what they're coming to unless you've communicated it effectively. And that means telling them what they can expect when they are there, and being very clear on the way that you are pricing your product and what's included and what's excluded. So it's all, you know, it's very simple. It's about communication. If you communicate well, your expectations will be managed, whether it's domestic or international.
Yeah, that's a really good point to end on. Thank you everyone for joining us on the SATIB webinar. It's been very interesting. I've learned something more about the domestic market. Thank you to Amy and to Stacey and to Don for joining me today as panelists, and I hope that you've also received something that will help you extend your runway, and maybe, who knows, your domestic tourist will be your forever tourist and not just the passing shot while we all wait for international to get back. Domestic or die. Anyway, have a great afternoon, guys. It was lovely to see you, and we will chat soon. Cheers, everyone.